Start streaming.
You got to put them right now. That needs to be set the headquarters.
Yep. Okay, we're live. Richard, we're live. Okay. So there was this rich father who had 12 kids, an Orthodox rich father. 12 kids. 12 kids is the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke in the 80s, in the 90s, 60s, 70s, 80s. That's when it started to the Rebbe said we've lost 1/3 of our nation during the World War, and it is up to us to try and complete as much as we can. Obviously, we can't bring those people back; they're gone. The fact people relate that number 6 million, but those 6 million would marry, would have children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. We lost more than 25 million just by base calculation. So the Rebbe said that it is our responsibility to try and have kids, more kids. And the Rebbe said about each one having their own minyan, 10 kids. And then when 10 kids, you try to get the 12 tribes, so 12 kids. And many people at my age, I was in the 70s, obviously. Yeah, it was 70s. People of my age would have 10, 11, 12 siblings, Lubavitcher, Chabad people in the United States or in Israel. Unfortunately, generation passed, and it's still a little more difficult than it was. Not having kids is more difficult, but it's just the mental state. People are more concerned, more worried. After the war, there was a lot of confusion everywhere. My grandmother, she should live in Bilwell, married my grandfather at a refugee camp. So nobody knew where they were going. Nobody knew what they're doing. They moved to France afterwards. My grandfather came from France originally. He was a French soldier in the World War. Everybody were a bit confused. So that kind of helped when they had big families. Here on this island, there's a lot of people that came, when the nationalists came here, a lot of people had a lot of kids, right? Yeah. Right.
I don't usually do this. I have to ask you a question.
Sure.
It could be
Let me turn on the air conditioner because I feel like it's going to be hot with your question.
You need a drink and you two got them all at the same time. All right, so here's the question.
Yeah.
For example, your mother had 4 kids, right?
Five.
She had 5 kids, right?
Yeah.
But Raquel's mother had 10?
8.
8.
Yeah.
Who had 10? Okay.
My sister has 10. My brother has 10. My other brother has 9.
So the question I have is, it's not a question, usually a little anxious. That's a lot of work for me, 10 kids. It's a lot to endure. I guess the pleasure, because nowadays women are thinking, hey, wait a second. And I want to also let you know something else too. When I was growing up, even from when I was 3 years old, we all thought to ourselves the whole class, we should recreate. We should procreate. Now, it's not so easy because you get married, you got bills to pay, and a woman might not like you so much. And there's a lot of things, there's a lot of variables to think about. But I just want you to know the Reform and the Conservatives said the same exact thing.
There was.
Yeah, we have to make up.
As much as we can.
Of course, things happen, you're a Catholic woman, but you try to make up.
But my great-grandparents had 13 children.
Had 13.
They had 13.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
is back in the early 20th century. But none of them had more than 3 children. Having grown up in such a large
it has an effect on different people differently. Many people perceive it. Yes, growing up in a big family, would you want to imitate? Would you want the exact opposite of it? The greatest family I know, biggest, not the greatest, 21 children in Kfar Chabad in Israel. 21 children, one couple, a father and mother, 21 kids. So, that's quite of a record, I'd say. Yes. 17, one of 17. And a rabbi in Hong Kong, one of 14 or 15, something like that. Okay. So this father had 12 children, and he decided that, it's time to retire. So they sold their house. They had a nice house, raising 12 kids. You have to have a big house. They sold the house, and they decided to distribute the money to each one of their 12 kids. And they decided the couple to go live every month with one child. In some other place, it'll be nice, experiencing, the old people, they like to be next to kids, next to leaving the family. So instead of staying there waiting for everybody, they sold the house. They gave money to everyone. And as a response to that money, everybody has to host them for 1 month. And then on an occasion, this guy was seen sleeping in the park. He was sleeping in the park with his wife. They were actually, and some of his friends said, "What's wrong with you?" And he said, "Oh, I forgot it's a leap year. There's 13 months. I didn't think of it when we distributed the money." So, 13 months. We're actually on the 13th month now. It's ending Saturday. It's ending on Shabbat. And this is the additional month. Why do we add an additional? Where's Reuben? I wanted Reuben to be here. This all is about astrology and lunar calendar, solar calendar. So why do we add another month? Because Passover has to be in the spring. Soon we'll see that the Torah tells us. It's very interesting. Usually the holidays are set by the lunar calendar, and the holidays are not movable. It has to be that date. It doesn't matter if it falls on a Tuesday or on a Friday, on a Saturday. That's when you do it. But Passover is very different. Passover has to happen in the spring. And this Shabbos, we're starting the month of Nisan. We're reading the reading for Passover and Chodesh. And let's see what the Torah tells us about the festival of Passover and the weather. Why do we have to wait for the spring in order to celebrate Passover? Here's what a quote from what we're reading this Shabbos. In Exodus, the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt. They were still in Egypt, saying, "This month shall be to you the head of the month. To you it shall be the first of the month of the year." And this is what Ramban said. This is the first commandment given to Israel through Moses. This is why it said in the land of Egypt, as all other commandments were given later on Mount Sinai. The names of the different months do not appear specifically in the Torah. Instead, month of Kol, the first, the second, the seventh, etc. This is for us to remember the great miracle of the Exodus, just like there are no names for weekdays, as they are all counting towards Shabbos. In Hebrew, we call day Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, which literally translates as the first day, the second day, the third day, and so on. That's how the Holy Tongue relates to days. We don't have names for days, we just count. What is the reason? Because we're counting towards Shabbos. Everybody's waiting for that day of rest, for that day of peace of mind, for that day of tranquility, of connection with God, of spirituality. That's Shabbos, it's Shabbat, and everybody's waiting for it. So the first day, we're only a few more days to go. The second, to end everything towards Shabbos. And the same with the month. The highlight of all the month, the highlight of the Jewish calendar is Exodus, is when we left Egypt. We're leaving Egypt. It's not something that happened 3,300 years ago. It's something we are reliving, and soon we'll see why. So the Torah does not find any names. There are names. Tishrei, Cheshvan, Kislev, all these names, they came with the Jews when they came from Babylon. When the Jews came from Babylon, they brought with them names for the month. They still named the month somehow. But I think Chinese, right? The Iwe, Urye, right? All the Sanye, I'm getting there. Yeah. Today is Siye Urhao, right? Siye Urhao, yeah. So this is the mitzvah. The mitzvah, what is the mitzvah? The mitzvah is to have a new moon. Speak of a great mitzvah. Celebrate the first day of the month. First of all, a mitzvah that starts with the commandment, celebrate, is always accepted as easy to do, right? Celebrate, right? But what do we need to celebrate? What's this whole story? So we want to find out what is behind it. What does the Torah tell us? We spoke about it a bit on Friday. We touched upon it. The first mitzvah is to sanctify the time. We had once a class about it, that it's not what you do with the time, it's the time itself that counts, that becomes holy. But what we are in the context of what we're saying is the Torah is telling us to sanctify the first month in order for what? And here's spring. You shall observe the festival of unleavened bread. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, as I commanded you at a appointed time, in the month of the springtime. For then you left Egypt, and they shall not appear before me empty-handed. Rashi, the month of springtime, here's what Rashi says, Chodesh Aviv, Hebrew, the month in which the grain fills out of its greenest. Beiveh, or Aviv, is an expression related to the word father of the firstborn and the earliest month of ripened fruits. So Rashi says, why is it so special? This is the month when the fruit starts to ripen. And Deuteronomy, the saying, keep the month of spring and make the Passover offering to the Lord your God. For in the month of the spring, the Lord your God brought you out of Egypt at night. So Torah puts a stress on the month. It's not the holiday. It's not what we need to do. It's when we need to celebrate it. It has to be, the weather has to be good outside, so to speak. Somebody would ask you, when's Passover this year? Someone's complaining, you Jews, it's all messed up. Sometimes Passover is in April, sometimes it's in March. Why don't you decide? We say the other way around. We, of course, go by the Jewish calendar. So sometimes it comes out in April or March. It's always the same day. But somebody would ask you, when is Passover? You tell them when the weather is good. When it's good weather, spring usually brings good weather, right? So what is this whole thing? What does this have to do with the weather?
Like a spring festival, isn't
A spring. It is a spring festival. We don't celebrate the spring. We celebrate on the spring or in the
it?
spring.
Because usually you have calves coming out, they have cows.
Right. And then this is what Al Sheikh is asking. What is keep the month of spring? When observing Passover, one doesn't observe the month, but the holiday. Also, who doesn't know we left Egypt in the spring? Why is it so important to reiterate it? Al Sheikh asks, it's a very good question. What do we have to do with the spring? Torah says, like they say on Yom Kippur, but like they say on all the other holidays, when the day comes, you fast. When the day comes, you blow the shofar. When the day comes, you eat matzah. What's this whole spring? What is this whole thing about? We must say there is a meaning to it, and soon when we'll see, you'll see how beautiful it is that the Torah gave us our instruction. So here's a little about our calendar. So the Gregorian calendar, the solar calendar, goes by 365 days, right? And it goes through first 3 months are winter, right? That's how it goes from January to
October 21st until
right. Exactly. So January, February, March are winter, and then the next 3 are spring, and the next 3 are summer, and the other ones are autumn or whatever it is. Whatever how you say. Yeah. So interestingly enough, I wanted Ruben to be here and comment about it. The Ibn Ezra says that in fact the solar calendar doesn't necessarily have to have 12 months. This whole division to 12 is artificial. It doesn't have, because if you go by the circle of the sun, you divide it to 12 just by being convenient. It's only for convenience. But you could the same way divide it to 10 or to 15 or to anything else that adds up.
It was 10 months. They added 2 months.
Right, they added, right? Because that explains the September, October, right? Which is set, October, right? That's Augustus, yeah. So anyways, this is out of convenience. It doesn't have to be 12 months. So that's artificial. To put it in a frame that works better, to put it in a frame that works better, you divide it to 12, but it doesn't have to be. Unlike, however, the Jewish calendar doesn't go by the sun, it doesn't go by a year. The 365 days is what it takes for the sun to circle around Earth. And, that explains the climate changes. Whereas the lunar calendar goes by days, and it comes out to be about 29 and a half days that's the time that it takes for the moon to circulate. So we have 6 months of 29 days and 6 months of 30 days, right? That some Rosh Chodesh are 1 day and some are 2 days. And it comes out to be approximately 355 days. So you have 10 days gap. 365 on the solar calendar, 355 on the lunar calendar. And those 10-day gaps what forms the leap year. So every 3 years or so, sometimes it's 3 years, sometimes you have to wait 4 years, and then 3 years, we add another month. And why do we add another month? Well, what does it matter? If we go by the month, we go by the month. Because we have to have Passover happen on the spring. And soon we'll see why. Yes?
2 questions. One, Mount Scopus in Jerusalem. In Israel. There's something to do with Mount Scopus, and that's why we do 2 days for Rosh Chodesh.
On that mountain, they were to observe the moon, and they would actually see the birth of the moon by the shape of the moon in the skies. And then through that, they would determine whether today is the first day of the new moon or it's only tomorrow. So Mount Scopus, they were looking, they were watching. So.
And the second question, obviously, going online. Okay, 1 o'clock in the morning on. We have a book actually. But are there rabbis, let's say 200 years ago, whose specialty was this kind of specialty? Maimonides,
850 years ago, he laid out the whole thing, all laws of Kiddush HaChodesh, and it's called sanctifying the month. It's considered to be one of the most complicated part of Maimonides' work of Jewish law, because it requires a lot of calculation, a lot of science, a lot of astrology as well. They need to know. Maimonides gives you the tools to do it, but he says, you're going to have to do the calculations yourself. So he did the calculation based on what he had, and 850 years from there, it's still valid. His calculations were right. Yeah. Reuben argues with some of it, I know.
We translated the Torah too.
Yeah, he wrote, by the way, mostly in Arabic. He wrote in Arabic. He felt that Hebrew doesn't have enough to express. Specifically, the Code of Jewish Law, that was written in Hebrew. But all the other, Guide for the Perplexed and all the other books, the letters he wrote were in Arabic. And he felt that Arabic has more, has more ways a person could express himself in. He felt Arabic was richer than, not Richard, richer.
Oh yeah, he's from Egypt, right?
He was born
He was a Torah.
Yeah, he spoke all the languages. He was a big doctor as well, and a mathematician and a physicist, yeah.
He's a cardiologist, right?
I don't know if he's a cardiologist.
Yes, Jewish was a cardiologist.
Okay, maybe he was a neurologist, Could have been a neurologist. So Torah tells us you have to stick to the spring. What's the story? What do we want? Why does Torah feel we need to? And look at what Rashi says. Rashi says that when God freed us out of Egypt, he wanted to make sure it will be on good weather. Now let me ask you a question. 210 years, people are enslaved. They're being tortured. Their babies are slaughtered. They're being thrown to the water. They kill their kids. They kill their women. And they say finally liberation comes and hold it. We want to leave when the weather is good. Don't. Would you imagine? Okay, so here's what Rashi says. Winter, summer, just let me go. Exodus, and Moses said to the people, remember this day on which you free from Egypt, the house of bondage, how God freed you from it with a mighty hand. Today you are going out in the month of spring. I'll just pretend like this didn't happen.
We're little kids. I'll go up there and slap them.
In the month of spring. Now do we not know in what month they went out? Early editions read, now did they not know in what month they went out? Rather, this is what Moses said to them. See the loving kindness that he bestowed upon you, that he took you out in a month in which is suitable to go out, when there is neither heat nor cold nor rain. So he says he takes the prisoners out at the most opportune time. Bakoshaot in Hebrew. In the month where it's the best suited, kasher is the best suited or proper to go out, kosher to go out. So Rashi says that God Almighty had timed everything. The way he said Moses, the way he knew how long it will take for Pharaoh to be convinced or non-convinced eventually, the way he'd know how long it took each plague. Each plague lasted for a certain time. So God had all this calculation in order for the day when they will leave Egypt will actually be in a time of spring, in a time of good weather, in a time that it will be easier to leave. And that's quite interesting. Why does God want us to do that? So they say about this businessman who used to travel a lot, being away from home. And he had a child who was quite wise. And he used to ask him, how much you make? Dad, how much you make? And of course the father, an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, what would I tell you how much I make? And he was trying to push him every time, see how much you make an hour. Just tell me, how much does it cost an hour? So eventually he gave him a number. He says, $250, that's what I make an hour. So next time he came home from a business trip, the child came with $250. He had these from his saving, from his mother. And he said, here's $250. I want to have your attention. I want to have you 1 hour with you. Just no phones, no emails, no meetings, no I have to leave, I can't stay here. Obviously, many people, there's two types of parents, right? Two types of fathers for that matter. There's a father that works hard and buys his children the greatest toys, the greatest games, the best bedrooms, and send them to the most expensive, camps, summer camps, and put them in the best private school and gets them a tutor for math, for English, for Chinese, for whatever. But they're not there for them. And there's a father who doesn't give all those things, but they come home, and they're with their kids. So one father loves the children, and the other father cares for the children. That's a distinction. That's a difference between the two. You see, with a father who cares and a father who loves. So the father who cares, he cares about the child as much as he can. He's going to get everything that money could buy. He's going to get the best teachers, the best classes, after school class. I don't want to see you come back at 8, 9, do ballet, do flute, do violin, do computer science, do video games. Just keep yourself busy. But the other father, right? The other father is there for his children. So granted, many children would perhaps, even adults, perhaps choose the first one, getting all the money. But obviously, as we grow older, we understand attention is something money can't buy. And a lot of kids end up kind of screwed up because they were pampered with money instead of attention. And it just can't replace it. It can't replace. Or we find a different example. There's a mother who goes to or a father, I do that as well, goes to change diapers for the kids. Obviously, I'm sorry to be elaborate. You're going to have to face it one day or another. There's a dirty diaper that has to be taken care of, Josh. It's quite a task, I must say. But, you put your gas mask and you put everything, the gloves, gloves, you send gloves and they, okay. You got a number 2 situation. Okay, so I see often my wife going to change diaper. She'll give a kiss to the child, to my kids. Obviously the situation is not something that triggers a kiss, but there's changing the diaper. There's changing the diaper. If you know what I mean. The attention, the love, the empathy that follows the process is much more important than actually making sure your child is clean. Passover is called the holiday of faith. Why is it the holiday of faith? Keep that scenario. 210 years, we know of nothing. We're a bunch of slaves being enslaved, like big time. Our babies are being slaughtered, are being drowned in the water. There's no hope. There's no future. There's nothing. Nobody knows if we're ever going to go out of this place. And how we're going to go out of this place. This was the world's biggest empire, and we were the lowest slaves in the world's biggest empire. No hope. All of a sudden comes this guy, this new star, this new guy in town, named Moses. Everybody were leaving Egypt. Oh, come on, Moses. They were smoking pot back there. What's wrong? Who's leaving what? What are you talking about? Who's going where? And he goes to Pharaoh and he says, let my people go. And Pharaoh laughs him out of the room and he says, who's going to let? I'm not going to let anyone. And he makes it harder for the Jews. They go back and Moses comes back to God. Right? Why did you send me? Look what's going on. And eventually, all these plagues happen and they go out. Now, when they go out, they need a lot of faith. Of course, they saw miracles, they saw wonders, but it was very different than what they used to be. Imagine that, 3, 4, 5 generations, 210 years is a lot of time. So they were trained to be slaves. They were trained to live in a certain mode, in a certain way. And now they're free. It required a lot of faith. It was a leap of faith, what you were saying?
But if they came out and the weather was bad and it was disastrous, that wouldn't be something that was good. But if they came out at a time when the leader was young, and there's fruit to eat and things, and that would probably help them have more faith in the future.
Absolutely, exactly. That's exactly what we're trying to claim here. God loves His people. God cares about His people. He sent Moses. He took us out, and all these miracles and wonders. But He also wanted to make sure we can see that, we can feel it. So He actually waited for the right timing, and that's something that we can relate to in a way, right? That we said there's loving someone, there's caring for someone, there's a difference between the two, the combination of both. God does not only love us, does not only care for us, He also loves us, and so on and so forth. It's not only about giving us life, it's about giving us quality of life or what to live for. Like this old beggar. No, I just like this old beggar. You're not old and you're not a beggar, as far as I know. This old beggar who somebody, everybody puts a dime, a quarter, a penny, and somebody gives him $10, and he's all excited, $10, and he takes the $10 and he buys $5. He buys this big pizza pie because he's hungry, he hasn't eaten in a while. And $5 more, he buys a nice bouquet of flowers, as much as you could buy for $5. In Taiwan, you could, a nice bouquet of flowers. And somebody's asking him, standing for the side, what's wrong with you? I mean, you could afford a meal. Why don't you save the money for tomorrow's meal or to have something else? And he said, the first $5 is I'll have what to live. I'll have how to live. And the second $5 is I'll have what to live for. This nice bouquet of flowers that stands next to him. It has nice smell. And obviously, with the situation this individual is at, this means a lot too. So God does not only care for us, He also loves us, and He's waiting for us. The Jews want to go out. My grandmother sometimes recalls how the Russians came to liberate them from Auschwitz. They didn't need to persuade them too much to leave. My grandmother always says they're the less fortunate people. Auschwitz was approached from two different directions. One was the Americans, and the other were the Russians. The Americans, when they came, they treated the Jews a little nicer. I won't elaborate, but a little nicer than the Russians, who were, although winning the war for our side, but they weren't really Jew lovers, never, specifically not the soldiers in the battlefield. A lot of Jews actually died by the Russians. The Russians were drunk and they were shooting. And anyway, so obviously coming to liberate the camp, nobody says, come back in 2 weeks, it's raining. I don't know if I want to leave now. I'm not sure this is such a good idea. But God is there waiting for us for the right weather. And He wants us to commemorate Passover in the very same manner. He wants us to relive Passover when the weather is nice. Now, granted, you can't have nice weather everywhere. I guess in Peru, the weather is very different than it is in Taiwan and from Israel or even San Diego is, warm the whole year. So is spring nicer in San Diego than other seasons? Yeah, it's pretty nice. And this also helps us understand a different holiday. What's the holiday we sit outside? Remember? Sukkot, right? We sit outside in Sukkot. And when we sit outside in Sukkot, what is it about? So the clouds are a symbol of love. Right? We know that when the Jews had left Egypt and they actually had to wander the desert for 40 years, we were always bad at directions. Okay? Don't take directions from someone else. 40 years we can't find the right way to Israel. It wasn't such a long distance, right? But still everybody's arguing, this way, you don't know anything. What are you talking about? This way. You would imagine a group of Jews arguing in the desert how to get to Israel. So 40 years they kept arguing. And while they were in the desert, God had surrounded them with clouds. This is why we sit on the sukkah. Did you know that? Sukkah is a symbol of the clouds that symbolize, that surrounded the Jews in order to protect them from the sun.
Why can't you sleep in the sukkah then?
Why can't I sleep in the sukkah?
Yeah, you and also other
Yeah, we could sleep there. You sleep there. You tell me how it was.
I do have fake grapes in your sukkah.
Who told you these are fake? Maybe they're real. Maybe they eat from it.
What's that saying in Hebrew, please?
You should be happy. Rejoice in your holiday. So, what is this whole thing? We set up a holiday, 7 days holiday, to remember the clouds surrounding the Jews in the desert. Let me ask you a question. There were other miracles happening. While at the same time, why don't we commemorate those? And that's the question that's asked by Shulchan Aruch as well, the Bach. Right? This is from Leviticus. In order that your ensuing generations should know that I had the children of Israel live in Bus Sukkot when I took them out of the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. And this is what the Bach asked. I had them in Sukkot. These are the clouds of glory who surrounded the Jews and protected them from the sun. There were many other things that God had done to us while we were in the desert, like the manna from heaven, for instance, or the well of Miriam. Miriam had a well. Miriam, Moses' sister. You know what a well is, right? The well was actually going with them. Would you imagine? That's something, a patent. They could land a man on the moon, but they can't make a movable well, could they? Right? The well is a hole in the ground. The well was actually with them. Whenever they were thirsty, the well was just there. They would reach out to it and have water. So this was a well traveling well. We didn't see any miracle commemorating that, or the bread from heaven, which we all know fell for 40 years, and that's how they sustained themselves. And that's what Moshe Mateani says, the manna as well as the manna and the well were existential needs. This is why no memory was set for them. The clouds of glory, however, were merely for the comfort of the Jews. And that is the reason we commemorate Sukkot, to remember that we're not talking about God making us alive so we could survive through the desert. We want to commemorate something nicer than that. We want to remember how God made us survive, of course, but in a nice way, in a nice manner, something that would touch our feelings. Yeah, bread, water, everybody needs that. If you're going to have a whole nation in the desert for 40 years, you might as well take care of that, the bread and the water. This doesn't come to belittle the miracle that God had done to us, but fact is, we don't commemorate it. The clouds of glory, everybody leave your house for 7 days, sit in the clouds of glory. This also answers another question, showing us our love. Okay, I'll tell you the halacha, the Jewish law. Someone who suffers in the sukkah is exempted from it. Okay, that's one thing. Another thing we want to relate to sukkah is kosher if only if it has two walls. You know that sukkah.
How's it going to stand on two walls?
or they had mechanical engineering. They had people to make it work. And the third question relates to what we're doing in 2 weeks for the Seder, the afikoman. You know the afikoman? Remember? Afikoman is a piece of matzah. We put it aside in the beginning of the Seder, right? The kids look for it. They fight for it sometimes. That's a different. And we eat it at the end of the Seder. I'll tell you the connection between these three. Okay, first, let me relate to the red part. Okay, so here's the rule. The rule is, Amitzta'er patur min hasukah. You know Hebrew? Amitzta'er patur min hasukah. You got that? Mitzta'er, someone who suffers. Somebody who says, I can't sit in the sukkah. I don't like the smell. I don't like the weather. The rain is dripping. The sun is too hot. I don't like the sukkah. So our sages say to us, you don't like the sukkah? Go sit home. Now let me ask you a question. As a rabbi or as an Orthodox Jew, so what if you don't like? Somebody says, I don't like circumcision. Okay. I don't like Shabbos. I want Shabbos to be on Tuesday because I got some stuff. Oh, you like Shabbos? No Shabbos for you. Oh, you don't like? Oh, I don't like late tefillin. It's too. No. Forget it. I don't like that I have to pork. No pork. Go have pork. If as long as you don't. What is this thing? You suffer, then you're exempted. What's the story, right? The Torah says that if someone is suffering from being in the sukkah, they don't have to sit in the sukkah. They can go back home and enjoy their dinner with their family. No sukkah for them. You're saying no sukkah for you? Okay, so that's exceptional. Since when do we relate to someone whether they like to do it or not? On the contrary, we say these are the things, these are the rules. You must follow the rules. If everybody's going to start tampering with it, where are we going to end? Oh, I don't like this. I'm sorry, this is not for me. People say, I'm sorry, this is not for me. The second thing, sukkah is only kosher of 2 walls. In fact, our sages from the Torah, our sages say you do need a third wall. So we do need a third wall, but from the Torah, and this is explained through one very simple answer of both. So what we just said earlier, Sukkah was a miracle, was done to us, that God had surrounded us with the clouds of glory. This is about how much He loves us. This is about His loving kindness towards us. So Sukkah is not about, let's look at what Rabbi Yosef Salant. To remember this grace of God, that even in the desert, He wanted to make sure we were as comfortable as can be, we celebrate Sukkot. A person must reside in the sukkah in the same manner that he or she would reside at home. This could explain why a person who is suffering from being in the sukkah is exempted. Something we never find with regard to the mitzvah. God said, I brought these clouds to protect you. I want you to be comfortable. You're not comfortable in the cloud? Okay, you don't have to be here. You don't have to. Sukkah is about those clouds. It's about God caring for us, doing that extra step. Taking us out of Egypt, saving our lives, bringing us to Israel, giving us everything. Those are, so to say, existential things. God said, I take care of the minor details. I want you to feel comfortable. 40 years in the desert never is no comfortable. But at least those days, at least have it as comfortable as you could be. During the desert, I'll surround you with clouds. At least the weather won't affect you. When somebody in a bad weather, a lot of people are in a bad mood. It affects us. You can't avoid it. Some of these winter days when it's raining, you can't leave. You can't go outside. Everybody in the office, they look like, that face. You can't go. You can't even get your lunch. It's raining. It's pouring. It's crazy, right? Or sometimes it's so hot. All the weather affects us. It affects us greatly. You would imagine. You would think no, but it is. So God says, this is to protect you. This is for your comfort. You feel you don't want to be in the sukkah? Okay. You suffer? You don't like the sukkah? You can leave the sukkah. It's okay. So this whole mitzvah in the round, and that's why we also have the 2 walls. Why the 2 walls and not 4 walls? Because the sukkah is reminding us the shade that the clouds has formed. In order to make shade, you can only have 2 walls. It's also enough. It's sufficient. 2 walls you could put a little roof on. Though granted, you do need some engineering to make 2 walls stand and a roof on. But the minimum, you can't have a roof with 1 wall, right? At least not that I could imagine. You need 2 walls, at least a corner, right? Make a corner. So it's the minimum that's required because this mitzvah is all about our comfort. Now, what about afikoman? I'll tell you what about afikoman. In the beginning of the Seder, we cut the matzah and we hide it. You know how it is, right? We hide it aside. And then at the end of the Seder, we eat that matzah. You do that in Peru? Same afikoman? Yeah, you eat it. And what's the story? So in the beginning of the Seder, we're like slaves that were just freed. We're just like, we're reliving Exodus, the beginning of the Seder. So I'll tell you something. Someone who suffered famine, someone who suffered hunger, if they get a little bit of food, first thing they put some aside. I don't know what's it going to be. I felt what it is to be hungry. I felt what it is to be enslaved. I have one piece of matzah. I'm cutting it to half. I'm putting it aside. Who knows what's it going to be? This rabbi is talking for 3 hours. I don't want to get hungry. I want my matzah. I want to make sure I got what to eat. So this is some kind of a thing. But at the end of the Seder, when we are all freed already, physically, spiritually, psychologically, we went through this whole thing of Egypt. We went out. You could come back to what you hid for later. You can eat it now. And make sure you'll have what to eat. Don't worry. Everything will be okay. You'll have matzah for the next day and for the day after and for many more other days to go. That's what Afikoman. In the beginning of the Seder, we're still, remember, it's not just this holiday. It's not just to remember what had happened. It's about reliving it. It's about re-experiencing it. And this is what the holiday is about, basically. Somebody'd say, okay, let's tell the story of what happened 3,000 years ago, and that's it, we're done. No, the whole concept here. Why does the Torah require us to relive it? So at the beginning of the Seder, we're still uncomfortable. We're still uncertain. What's it going to be? We're like slave. You got matzah? Okay, give me half. Let's put it aside. Hide it. You hide it. You'll see people, you hide it. You don't leave it out in the open. Somebody else can take it. You don't want that, right? You hide it aside. Seder is over. Oh, remember, I can eat it now. Everything will be okay.
The kids are supposed to find, right? The kids don't look for it?
What? The kids look for it. Yeah, that's the minhag. Although the Chabad minhag is that they don't steal it. Some people steal it. It's a whole, So we rely on God. At the end of the day, we rely on God to provide for us. We don't really have to keep food aside for a rainy day. Here's a letter that, not a letter. There's a story about the, Rav Shmuel Geisman. He was one of the Chabad rabbis to Israel, and this was the time when the Rebbe said brought this about lighting Shabbos candles, that not only the women should light, but also the girls, the kids should light also Shabbos candles. And this Rabbi Greisman was trying to persuade people to also have their kids do it. And once he calls this family that they were kind of far relatives of him, and he says, this is a big thing to light Shabbos candles, maybe your daughter. And the mother answered, my daughter will never light Shabbos candles. And he says, why would you think that? And he notices that while she's explaining on her daughter, she doesn't say anything about herself. So he suspected maybe she doesn't light Shabbos candles too, and not only the daughter. And he's asking, and she says, no, actually I do. Oh, you do? So what's the story? She said, I'll tell you what the story is. She says, a few weeks ago, we went to the movies, my husband and I. And there was this Chabad rabbi who was giving out those pamphlets, about the mitzvah campaign. Mitzvah, all they do, mitzvah, make do. He wasn't asking for money, he was just giving. And he saw my husband, and he says, would you lay tefillin? Would you put on tefillin? My husband said, no, I'm not interested, and he left. And he said, we sat at the movies, and I thought, I was just thinking of what happened. I digested it, and I thought it wasn't so nice that the way my husband, treated the guy. He could have refused with some manners. He could have, it's like the guy was a little upset at him for just asking. You could say, no, I'm not interested, whatever it is. But and she thought when the movie ends, I'm going to go back to that place and I'll ask sorry or just try to make it up with the guy. And the movie is over, and they go back to the same street corner, and the guy's gone. He's no longer there. It's kind of a long movie, 2 hours. I don't know, 2 or 3 hours. He's not there standing, and she feels kind of amiss. She says, but she looks at the floor and she sees some of the pamphlets. Obviously, some people take, and either they throw it or it's false. And she sees some of the pamphlets, and she opens the pamphlet. It speaks about doing mitzvah, and she says, I made this person feel uncomfortable. My husband did. I want to do something good, something positive. At least this incident would have a positive result. So she decided she wants to light Shabbos candles. So she tells it to the rabbi there. And she says, my husband missed one mitzvah, but then I gain a mitzvah that I do every week. And, the message that God was giving us about Passover is not necessarily has to do with the past. It's even more has to do with the future. You see, with this whole story, the Jews, all these years, they felt miserable. They felt forsaken. They felt lonely. When Moses is asking God, when God tells him, you go to the Jews and tell them, I am the Lord your God. You know what they're going to ask me? Where was God until now?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Who's this story? What are you telling us stories? He tells it to God. He says, "Vehem lo ya'aminu li ve'lo yishma'u koli." They won't believe me. They won't listen to me. Why would they after all these years? And God said, you should go and you'll see they will believe you and they will listen to you. And indeed, that's what happened. Because although they were in that physical slavery, but their soul, their spark, their fire were still on. It will never be put out. And as soon as Moses just had to, give them a bit of fuel, and their internal fire, their internal flame actually was ignited, and they eventually obviously came out of Egypt. So, the Jews said, where was God until now? And God says, tell them about the weather. What's the weather? What's the story with the weather? So, he's a little bit of science. I don't know about science. What happens with the trees during the winter? So during the winter, it's dark and it's cold, and the trees are casting their leaves, right? And the trees are as if they're naked, frozen, kind of awkward, right? But basically they're asleep. And nature is not dead, obviously. It's just asleep. It's just asleep. And the trees in the winter don't get much sunlight. And, although there's water obviously coming out, but the water sometimes in cold places, the water actually freezes. So they don't actually nourish the plants because the water freezes. So the trees can't have enough energy or enough strength to support the leaves, the flowers, and all that. So the trees are like in a energy saving mode, right? They're trying to keep their energy to survive, to go through the winter. But basically, while they're asleep, they could preserve their energy. The tree could preserve the energy. And then, when the weather changes, all of a sudden everything blossoms. So during that winter, during that time, the tree was actually preserving energy. The tree was trying to utilize the resources, the very little resources that are, in order to just support itself. But this was a phase, this was a stage where the tree actually holds itself. Everything is being frozen until the summer, when the summer comes. So God, taking the Jews out of Egypt in the spring, is telling the Jews, actually, all that suffering, all that travesty, all that misery, this was like a winter. This was like a sleep. You were all asleep. We were all asleep. When the Jews are suffering, God's suffering with them. I am with them, God says. Because what does God, God says, what do I have in my world other than my children, other than you? So when you suffer, when you're in pain, I'm also in pain. When you shed a tear, I shed a tear too. When you break out with a smile, I'll reciprocate. I'll smile to you. So God says to the Jews, I'm waiting for springtime to take you out. What's springtime to do with this? God said, this is winter. All these years are like one long winter. The tree's not dead. The tree's not over. The tree is asleep. The tree preserves energy. And really? So winter of the life is usually... Oh, really? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, it is. It's a cycle. Uh-huh. Exactly. Interesting. I didn't know that people use that expression. So, basically, while the Jews were in Egypt, this was like a winter time. This was like a time when everything was frozen. And in fact, during that time, they were able to gain enough force, enough energy to use it later in order to leave Egypt, in order to advance, to become a nation, to receive the Torah, to be a holy nation, to be a chosen nation. All these things took place while being asleep in Egypt. They tell about the American general Douglas MacArthur, right? That he was very famous. He was a bit too dare. That's why he was removed out of his job. But his famous expression, we're not retreating, we're advancing the other way. So he never wanted the soldiers to feel that they were in a retreat. They were in a retreat, by the way, many times. He was a very daring general, but he made some mistakes as well. A lot of people like the success stories. But he succeeded, right? But eventually he was taken out of his job. Yeah. So we're not retreating, we're advancing the other way. And this is what the Rebbe says every person has a winter time, and that winter is when the person actually gets the most energy. This is a letter the Rebbe wrote to someone actually in Tunisia. This was a letter to someone in Tunisia. And he says like this: regarding the holiday of Pesach we have just celebrated and the days of spring that are blossoming in full glory. Scripture associates the Pesach holiday with the month of spring. By nature, when spring arrives, the powers of nature that were hidden during the winter blossom forth. During the winter, it appears to the eyes of the observer, that the power of creativity, growth, and development have ceased. Then suddenly, in the month of spring, it becomes evident that the entire duration of the winter was nothing more than a gathering of energy, so that afterwards budding trees and fields clothed with green would appear. As our sages state, one who goes out in the month of Nisan and sees trees that produce flowers must recite the blessing. This contains a lesson for each of us, even in our lives when there is a period in which it is possible to err and think that it is not the time creativity, growth, and development. It is almost an absolute certainty that this is merely an error in perception. The intermission will be used to gather strength that will lead, to borrow the wording of the analogy, to produce flowers and grow fruit. So the Rebbe says Passover is not only about the holiday, it's about the timing. The timing is very significant because it happens in the spring. It shows you that everything that was prior to that was a stage, was a phase. It was something, and it goes on, the letter continues. An allusion to such a process can be found regarding the Pesach holiday of the bitter era of Egyptian exile, an exile that involved both the body and the soul, to the extent that the archangel of Egypt argued, what is the difference between these, the Egyptians, and these, the Jews? I'll tell you what's the story. When the Jews were crossing the Dead Sea, they were starting to cross, and the Egyptians went after them. As they went in, you remember the sea was split open. As they went in, they went to the other side. Actually, they did a U-turn. They came from the same side. But anyways, while they were going out, the water started flushing. The water started going on the Egyptians, drowning them. The angels asked God, what is the difference between these two groups of people? Those are idol worshippers and those are idol worshippers. And that was the fact. That was true. And then God says to them, I've chosen the nation, and so on. You know, the whole story. But that argument was a true argument. The angel said, what's the difference? Why are you saving them and those are going to drown? So you would imagine, what state were they at? You imagine this not only a physical suffering, this was a spiritual suffering. They were not recognized as anything else but the Egyptians. Nevertheless, in a very short amount of time, the refinement achieved through the Egyptian exile was revealed within them. In 50 days, they ascended from the 49 gates of impurity to the level where they could receive the Torah from the Holy One, blessed be He, alone in His glory. So, basically, the weather does change, and the weather does matter, because this specific holiday, is considered a very general one, or one might argue the most general one, because this is when we were formed as a Jewish nation. This is when it all started. The Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all these are beautiful stories. Genesis, Adam, Noah, all these. But when did the Jewish nation appear? When did this, what we know as today, this is the beginning of everything, Exodus. So God says to us, you remember Passover? You don't think of it as something that happened in the past, but it's something that happens also with us. And through that, we could also explain something else that relates with Sukkot. You know, Passover and Sukkot are
6 months apart, right?
Yeah, are 6 months apart, and are very to do. Exactly, they're to do with. They're like two sides. Yeah, two. So Sukkot, we take the etrog, right? Pri Etz Adar, it's called. What is Adar? So the Gemara says an item that dwells on its tree from year to year. The etrog stays in the tree. It's not a seasonal fruit. It stays in the tree the whole year. Why does it? Because the etrog gets from the winter, from the summer, from the autumn, from the spring, gets everything, all the energy from everything. This is the and just to answer another question I said I'm not getting into it. It's 8 o'clock. Okay, I'll speed through it. Okay, so winter is a part of growth. You know, when Joseph was discovered by the brothers, finally they find him, and then Joseph says to them, I am your brother. Please go and quickly to my father and tell him to come to me. Before they leave Egypt towards Israel to get Jacob, Joseph sends gifts. Among the gifts he sent a bottle of wine, old wine. He sends it to Jacob. Okay? He sends it to Jacob, and our sages are asking, first of all, Egypt was known for many things, but not for its wine. Israel actually had much better wines to begin with. Why is Joseph sending a bottle of wine? It's like somebody coming from America to Taiwan that will bring you a pair of chopsticks or Chinese tea or, what is this thing? Why would he send him a bottle of wine? Can't he find something else to send? But Joseph says, this wine, as the years go by, it becomes better. As the years go by, it becomes tastier, it becomes more pleasurable. And he says to his father, all these years, he says what happened. He's going to anticipate what happens. His father was lied to by the brothers. You remember many years, 22 years before Joseph was gone, and they came back and said, we don't know what's gone. Maybe he was eaten by an animal. You remember how they dye his garments with blood. He was probably beaten by something, eaten by something. You remember the story. So Joseph says, this would be very embarrassing to the brothers to come back to Jacob and say, oh, by the way, we kind of lied to you for 22 years. We didn't tell you the truth. He's actually, we sold him and he's been okay. But let's go to Egypt and everybody have a great time. That would be quite a harsh conversation. So Joseph sends the wine and he says to his father, this wine is old. I didn't buy it today. I didn't get it today. I bought it many years ago. I bought it when I was so down. I want you to know this is a cycle. This is a process I had to go through. This is a phase. So don't get upset at the brothers. And that's what he tells them, the message he gives them. Don't get upset. This was a part of God's plan. This was his scheme to begin with. I had to get to Egypt to save the world, to save you, to save my father, to make sure there's no famine. He tells them the whole story, but he sends a bottle of wine. Why does he say? He wants to tell his father the wine gets as it's old. I didn't buy it today. You buy wine today, you can't drink it. You have to wait 22 years. I'll be waiting to open this wine bottle. And the same applies the green square, the children of Moses. Moses had 2 kids. He was the biggest and the most loyal and the biggest prophet and the greatest leader. He went with us, in fire and in water. He came with us. He fought for us. He loved us. We loved him. What about his children? Where are his children? He had 2 kids. He had 2 kids while they were in Egypt. He had 2 kids. What's the story? Why can't we hear them? You'd think, Moses, so some say, okay, he didn't have time for his family. He was so busy with everybody else driving him crazy, but that's impossible. Where is his kids? So I'll tell you where the kids are. It says that when Moses, after he ran out, right, Pharaoh wanted to kill him, right? Moses grew up in the palace. You remember that story? Elizabeth, you remember the story? He grew up in the palace, and then he went out and he fought this Egyptian killing a Jew, and he killed him. And then Pharaoh realized that, what's going on. The guy who's in my palace as my grandson is actually about to be the leader of the Jews. So he wanted to kill him. He gave him to the person they wanted to behead him, and his neck turned into marble. That's how it says. And he couldn't, the sword broke. And then he was given an opportunity and he ran away. He met Zipporah by the well. They got married. They had 2 kids. And then the burning bush, right? The burning bush, God comes down and says, I want you to go. I chose you. And Moses said, I don't want to go. I stutter. I can't go. My brother, this. And then he approaches Egypt. That's it. Finally, he got the mission. He got the task. He's going to Egypt to free the Jews. As he approaches Egypt, his brother comes to greet him, Aaron, and he sees him with the family. And he says, oh, how are you? He said, don't ask. God, burning bush. How did I get into it? No, he didn't say that. But I'm going to get the Jews out. What about them? He says, what about them? What about them? Why would you bring them to Egypt? What do you mean? He says, everybody's suffering in Egypt. Why would you? Yeah, he says, let's send them with their mother home. Send them back to Midian. We'll finish our business here with Pharaoh and they'll come back. So because the children of Moses never tasted that flavor of slavery, of enslavement, of hardship, they could not grow to be leaders. They could not grow to be... If you don't go through the winter, you won't blossom in the spring. If you don't go through that hardships, if you don't go through those phases, you won't be able to understand, to comprehend, to perceive the person in front of you. You have to go through everything. So the children of Moses were spared, right? Aaron said, what are you bringing it for? Everybody's dying here. Your kids are safe. Keep them safe. Keep them safe was a good thing to do, was a smart thing to do. But guess what? They actually didn't taste the flavor. They didn't realize what it means. They didn't go through hardships. And they couldn't they didn't have what it takes. So they couldn't continue the way of their father. So just because that, it gives us a little, different understanding on hardships and what it is. Anyway, so this was that for today. And if you have any questions about what we spoke about,
I don't understand the reason why you have spring and Sukkot. What's autumn and spring?
they're the two sides of the year, right? They're connected. They're binded. They're connected with each other. So Sukkot is about the clouds, that are clouds of glory that are protecting us. Passover is the time also we went outside, but they're from both sides of the year. So they're, it is like a circle where two edges are.
9 days, right?
Yeah, each is right, 8 days basically, yeah. And then Sukkot has another festival.
Isn't Passover, this is about for the kids. We always talk about how the kids really benefit from Passover.
Well, it's for the adults too. What do you mean?
No, because the oxycodone, you hide the bone outside, and Elijah's coming. The kids are running around like crazy.
Yeah, well, kids are innocent. They don't have to hide their enthusiasm. Sometimes adults, they feel ashamed when they're excited over something. What are you, childish? What are you, a little child? What's the story, right? So they feel a bit of a shame. But, we always like to relate to kids, but we're all kids, aren't we? We all have that. We all want that experience. We want that enthusiasm. So Passover is not only for kids.
One more quick question, sorry.
Yes.
I forgot a question.
I'm sorry.